What's up, everybody? My name's Cody, and we're going to do some edits today. Just a precursor about my style. I use Lightroom Classic predominantly. I don't do a lot of editing in Photoshop, mainly because Lightroom just has so many awesome tools today that it kind of makes Photoshop irrelevant for a lot of my workflows. And I'm not doing a lot of like advanced editing. I don't over edit my photos, at least I try not to. If you're somebody just starting out learning to edit, there are a lot of knobs and dials that you can play with in Lightroom, and it can honestly be overwhelming. You can easily over edit a photo and not realize it. And so it's good to kind of keep ourselves in check as we're doing our edits and like kind of stepping back and saying, okay, is this the style that I'm going for? For my photos, I typically am going for a more natural realistic look because I do a lot of portraiture. I really want to kind of capture the way things are or were during that day or that session. And granted, there's a lot of things that can allow you to get very creative with all the different tools, especially if you're doing masking and things like that. You can go wild with the kind of effects that you can apply to the photos. So what I want to go over today is just some kind of basic steps that I do when I am, doing my kind of initial edits. And typically what I like to do after I've went through all my photos, pulled out all the ones that, are clearly not keepers, there's like maybe they're blinking or it's out of focus or whatever. Um, clear those out, show the client, the ones that we have remaining, let them pick through what they want to keep. And then that's where we are now is I'm looking at the keepers. I've already done some edits already through some of these photos, which we can go back to. But this one here I want to start with. So this is a senior portrait. This was kind of late afternoon. Sun was still pretty high overhead. Um, but we had our back to the sun so that we got this nice edge lighting on her hair, edge lighting around her skin and her, all around her frame and everything. So like that's already, looking really good. We don't have harsh shadows casted onto the face or anywhere else. So we're already starting out really well. And this one's a little underexposed, which is how I do like to shoot. Um, and I shoot with a Nikon Z6 III primarily. And it's been a fantastic camera so far. Uh, I am actually okay with the loss of about a stop of dynamic range because most of the stuff that I'm shooting is pretty even lighting, and I bring my strobe with me if I do need to balance anything. So I'm not too worried about the dynamic range being less than, say, a Z6 II or a Z7 or what have you. Now, the first thing I'm going to do with this, because it is underexposed, I can't really get an idea of what edits this might need. So I'm going to bring the exposure up just overall, just so I can get an idea, like what are we seeing here? So this is about the exposure that I would, like to see. Um, and right off the bat, I can tell there's quite a bit of like kind of red casting onto her face, like, the lower parts of her face. Um, and that is coming from the redness of the bricks below. So these are things that I want to look for is just this weird shift or transition in skin tones where above her cheeks, where like that red cast is not reaching, is a little bit, cooler. It's a little more of a bluer color, and then below it's more of a warmer color. And there's a lot of really uh, different ways we can approach tackling this. Yes, we may go from our, global edits, pane right here. We can pull, something out of our color mixer. We can select that area. We can see, how much of this is it going to affect. I can reduce that range, right, so that it's only affecting certain areas, and we can see kind of what's not grayed out are the areas that it will affect. So we got like her leg, parts of her hand and fingers, and the area that we were originally seeing, which is very interesting. So this is one way that yes, we could take that. And what I would do is essentially I would maybe desaturate this just a touch so that now it matches the rest of her face. And so we can see here if I click this little eye, it turns the mask off just temporarily. If I let off, it restores it, right? But this may not be the best approach because what this could also do, depending on if there's other colors in the scene that match this shade or this tint, then it could affect the entire scene of the photo. And then that's where you would use like a subject mask in order to tackle that, which we'll get to subject masks shortly. There is an issue though that, using these the color point color is that it can cause this weird shift in the skin. So it looks like the top of her hand and her arm is more blue because we've desaturated this, this red down. So this looks a little unnatural. And these are things that we might run into where we have to balance this color out too. And as we're looking at this, we also want to be kind of paying attention for any kind of things we might need to edit out, like if there's blemishes, like there's a scar here. So, okay, let's make a mental note. We'll come back around to that. Um, but what we can also do while we're here is we can like sample this area and we can change things like the hue and the saturation. And because this is actually um, something that we can't really affect the way I want within this the color mixer pane. I'm probably going to have to do more of a subject mask to get this right, because I can't really do much with the hue other than it just kind of changing its general kind of pink or blueness. So that's like probably not what I want. What I can do instead is I can kind of bring the saturation back up just a little bit, and I can work on figuring out, is this going to do what I need it to do? And kind of based on what I'm seeing, nope, probably not. So real quick, I can just try to come in here, apply some kind of effect just kind of through the global adjustment pane, which is kind of what all this is here. It adjusts everything in the photo. Um, I can now shift gears and I can try a different approach, which would be like my local subject masking. Um, Before I do that, I'm going to kind of notice that, the background is a bit dull too. It's a little dark. I do want to bring up the background. I feel like there's a lot that we can pull to balance this. I also want to make her a little bit brighter, just kind of like adjusting the exposure overall. I don't think gives me the effect that I want. Um, and as I'm doing these edits, by the way, I like to kind of switch back and forth between, looking at the before and after, so I can kind of see where I started and where I'm going. And this reminds me that, like, I have a point where the photo has just come straight out of camera, and looking to compare between the before and after helps keep me in check to make sure I'm not over editing a photo, making it too warm or too saturated or whatever it might be, or too contrasty, unless, of course, that's what I'm going for. Using presets is really beneficial. So I have this preset that I've built, and you can make all the presets you want in here, and then you can save them by clicking the create preset, and it'll ask you if you want to make it with your current settings, and you can update presets by coming in here, and you can update the preset with your current settings, right? So if you ever need to make a modification to that, you can just jump in there and do it. So I'm going to bring up that exposure again, and I want to see how this is feeling. And I will come in here and I'll tweak this preset kind of based on what I'm going for, right? And in this case, I do want a little bit more of my highlights going on here. I do want to have it feel a little brighter. The whites toggle, I'm just gonna kind of play with this a little bit, see how that feels. I do want to have like kind of a bright, airy feeling about these photos, that when somebody sees it, it really just kind of feels like they were outside, on that day. Some things I'm also noticing is the hair looks pretty orange here on the edges, and it looks a little unnatural. I would want that to look a bit more like, um, natural sunlight. So we're gonna take a mental note of that. The photo overall is a little bit cool, and I like to shoot warm. So I'm gonna like boost this warmth just slightly here. I don't want to go crazy. Like if I crank this up a lot, then, can make it look like a bronze statue. And I definitely don't want to do that. So I'm gonna bring that back down and play with the color temperature. And what I'm looking for is kind of a nice balance between like natural skin tones, and also feeling like it's realistic. Like if somebody were there in person, is that the way it looked to their eye? Um, so we're getting there. I still need to kind of handle this kind of redness on her face and work on kind of balancing out some of these colors. I don't want this to look, uh, such a major contrast between the top and lower part of her arms. So we want to balance that out. So what we're going to do, we're coming here and make a subject mask. And what this is going to do is going to scan the frame. It's going to see, okay, where is this person in this image? It's gonna automatically highlight everything about her. Sometimes it will do things like, like you can see here, where it's like grab this area between the cord and her dress. Sometimes that happens. You can easily get rid of that by using like a subtract and then do a brush, hold space bar and then click to zoom in. And then you can see where like I could just like brush this out and make that not part of her. This is where like editing can get really tedious and it may not be necessary, right? So if you do your edits and then you find that what you're getting looks weird, in those kind of areas, then totally go in and start like cleaning that up if it really makes a difference. You might find that it doesn't. And nobody will even notice. It is easy to pixel peep, where we zoom in and we just look at all the things that probably nobody else is going to notice, and we just have to remind ourselves that oftentimes we will have photos that get posted on social media, Instagram, Facebook, wherever. Maybe they are sharing with their friends through like text and whatnot, and like people aren't going to be zooming in and looking at all the fine little details that we would see as a photographer. So don't go crazy trying to get every single little detail right. What I like to do as well occasionally is I'll zoom out the photo, make it small, as if like I am expecting this person's probably going to be, looking at this on their phone. That's where they're going to be sharing it. They probably, for the most part, are going to like looking at this on maybe a computer, and it's not going to be like a super large display, highly zoomed in, that's high resolution. I want to see what this photo is going to look like from, a more realistic perspective. And if I'm zoomed out, then what I am getting then is like this impression of like what the photo is going to look like when like a normal person is going to be looking at it. And that helps me see imperfections and things that would be obvious and stand out. Like these wisps in her hair are like can be a little distracting. So I might clean those up. But I think overall, I don't want to like go gangbusters and try to like clean up every single little thing that nobody's going to notice. So just stay focused on what's going to move the needle in terms of quality and try not to let yourself get bogged down in the very little things that maybe aren't going to make much of a difference. So I mentioned we want to be able to do a little bit of adjustments here on her. So we mentioned we have this it's more red hue and this little dropper. By the way, you can click the little point color dropper, and this tells Lightroom, what area are we sampling. And again, I want to visualize the range because I want to see like what all this is actually affecting. And what's really cool here is I can, because I'm doing this in a mask, I can add additional subtract like brushes and stuff, and I can like unmask these different areas I don't want it to like affect. Super handy. So we'll get to that in a sec. But let's kind of boost this up a little bit and just kind of see what we're gathering. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to desaturate this just a touch. So already we're seeing a big difference. So I'm just gonna kind of click and see how this is looking, and everything starts to look more balanced in her face. We are getting a much better representation of like the way we expect somebody's face to look. And the human eye is really interesting because what it does when we're looking at somebody is it corrects for a lot of things. We are not symmetrical, for example, we're chiral, meaning that we have similarities, between our left and right side of our bodies, but they're not exact, right? And our brain corrects for these things that are not 100% right. For example, most people have, one eye that's maybe a little lower than the other, maybe one ear is slightly different size or shape, hands are different sizes, but our brains don't really detect that. And just like when we're doing photo shoots and stuff, we don't see all these little details that are going on, like the color of the bricks shining up on her face. But when we get into editing, it really becomes apparent, and we have to pause and go, oh, I noticed that. I am now observing that is a little bit of a, weird color that I don't want to happen. So let's go ahead and clean that up a bit and get the skin tones balanced out before we really do anything else. So yes, I warmed up the frame. I wanted to get it kind of where I wanted the warmth to be for the most part. Um, and I like to do that first from a global perspective, because then when it gets to the local adjustments like this where I'm doing masking, it can have a big impact on like how much I need to adjust on the actual subject. So if I do a lot of edits on the subject first and then I start doing global adjustments, it can end up throwing off the entire subject mask that I have here. So right off the rip, I just want to see kind of how this is looking like. I can click this little eye and hold it to kind of hide the mask and turn it and let it back on. And I can kind of get a feel for like how things are looking. Skin tones are looking more natural. This is like starting to come together really well. So I'm kind of getting everything equalized, right? And now I also want to be able to come down here and we can affect some of the skin tones like on the top of our arm. And this is just a result of like, it was a very sunny day. The skies are very blue. There's no real overcast. And so this can cause some skin tones to look more, blue than normal. And that's just kind of, the effects of, photons coming into the sensor. And now we did try the point color before, but I don't think that this is actually going to work necessarily. We can try a hue shift here and see. Let me visualize that range first and see where we're getting. Yeah, see, I want to get little parts below the arm too. So we can bring that back down. And if I do a hue shift, let's just see if this makes a difference. And it really doesn't help me here. I want to get that top of her arm to be about the same as her um, as the skin tones on the part of our arm that's facing downward to the ground. So let's do this. We'll grab a new mask. We'll add, just click a brush. And the cool thing about the brush is, while we can paint over really any part, we can also add additional intersecting masks that tell it what to look for within this brush. It's pretty handy. So the yellow, which by the way, you can change the color of your mask by clicking that little square and picking your new color. I like yellow because I tend not to shoot a lot of yellow things, so it becomes easier to see. Um, I can do this where I can say intersect with, and then I'm gonna do a color range. And this gives me a brush where I can like click and drag over an area, and it takes the relative color values into account. So you saw the mask, the brush area, the yellow, used to extend onto her dress, and now it's mostly just here on her arm, and that's great. So I can turn off the overlay if I want, but the overlay is nice to have just, to give me a reference point. When I start doing my edits, it's going to kind of automatically go away. Now, because this looks a little blue, I just need to kind of add a little bit of warmth to it. So I'm just going to see if I can warm this up and if it really make it blend a little bit better. And so that's getting there. Again, remind myself, let's zoom out from this and see if it's still obvious. So, and then you can kind of go crazy with the sliders. You can go, wild with it, and that kind of helps reset the eyes, perception of kind of what's going on here. And so I think I might need more than just the temperature mask. I probably need to do a little bit of a hue calibration, maybe a little bit of tint adjustment on in there. And so sometimes these little things get a little tedious, do help pay off. We can see there's like a area between that is a kind of left off where like it's not blending properly. So we'll want to also take care of that. Um, and this is kind of just getting this right in the first, first photo. We can then copy this over to other photos, which is really handy. So I'm going to turn this tint more pink because her skin is more of a pink tone. So we're going to move it more magenta is what it is. Um, and so what I can do here, so I'm just going to save that and just copy paste that or copy that value, right? So I can just do what I need to do if I need to apply it to other photos. But I can click this little eye and see how it looks and then back off. This again is like allowing me to see where I came from, where I'm at. Am I going the right direction? And right now, this looks like it's pretty well blended. Um, I think I just need to get in here with the brush, which I can do by clicking the little brush icon, and it gives me a new brush, and I can kind of brush this part of her arm. But, as I'm seeing, it's a little bit too orange. I probably just need um, a different brush for that area. So I'm just gonna Control Z to undo, and we're gonna do another mask. We're just gonna brush this little area here, just to kind of, because we're gonna blend that color in. And we are going to right click on this, intersect with, and we're going to do a color range, and we're just going to do this little spot here. And you can also single click on this too. You can hold shift, you can click multiple points up to, I believe, 5. And there you go. So I can sample multiple areas of something. This is why I like these um, masks are really flexible. They allow us to do so much more than a global adjustment. Um, and that's why I really enjoy using them. So we've got that going. So with this, what I'm seeing is that this part of our arm is a little bit of a darker tint to it. Um, and I need to kind of bring that up just a little bit, and maybe I can do that with a little bit of exposure adjustment. Maybe. Let's just see what happens if I just kind of barely bump this up. And it's starting to blend much better. Still looks a little dark underneath. Is that where my mask is though? Yes. So it's a little darker, but I can't really go crazy with the exposure because it'd be very obvious that like, we're doing something here. Like it'll stand out too much. So let's pop that down. Just do that. And I wonder what happens if we bring this up. Okay. Now let's turn this mask off. It's looking pretty good. If I close out my mask panel and I just zoom out, do I really notice it? That's a good test. Is it like clear that something was edited there? That's what I want to make sure I always do, is that like it's not all that obvious that the photo has been edited in some way. It's that, it just looks natural, like that's just kind of how this person looks. That's kind of my main goal. So far, where we came from was this, and we could see even in the original photo, because the color of the sky and the color of the brick was such a large contrast between these two different opposing colors, blue versus like this red. Even in the original photo, we could see a big difference. And now where we are is that this looks relatively like a natural skin tone. And so we can probably stop, hammering on that and then move on to other things. We can, as we kind of come back around to this stuff and we're thinking about, as we're, like going through another pass of our images, we can kind of do that after we've kind of reset our eyes, like step away for a little while, come back, give it another look over, make sure it feels good, that it's to the quality that you would feel comfortable with, that it looks the way that you're expecting. And if it does, then you're all set. Like you're good to go. Don't edit that photo anymore. It's really tempting to get in there and start doing some more tweaks and adjustments, but you got to remind yourself if it does not move the needle in terms of the matching the quality and the expectations of the client, don't do it. Save yourself a lot of time. Now, where we are now, I feel like we still have a little bit that we could do here. I actually am curious to see if I kind of boost her just slightly. I just want to bring up the exposure just a little bit. I didn't use a flash here, so I do want to make her pop a little more. I want the whites to be a little more, shouty. So I can kind of like take that off and then kind of slowly bring it up just a little bit. I don't want to go crazy with it. And I tend not to really touch the contrast too much. Contrast can be helpful, like how it's affecting the hair if I really like, make that a thing. But overall, what it does is it also makes a big contrast between the other parts of her figure, and I don't really like the way that looks personally. I don't like to do super saturated um, colors as well. If I do want to like, adjust the color of something, then I tend to use a point color. Like I could come to her chords here, and I could select the chord, and I could like really boost the saturation of her chords. I could bring up the brightness a lot. I could really bring out those individual things as opposed to trying to um, affect the entire person. I really do want to try to avoid that. Um, let's see. Let's zoom in here. So I do want to bring down the saturation just a touch more with that red. So I want her skin tones to feel natural. And then what I can do, because I like my photos warm overall, I can warm this whole photo up to kind of bring those skin tones, make them look more, you know, even and the scene more even and warm. That's just globally was what I will do there. So just at this point, I feel like I've gotten the skin tones pretty well balanced. They're not too pink. They're not too, you know, blue or any one direction. They are starting to look pretty good for what I'm gonna be aiming for. Now, the background, I can also do something really interesting here where I can just make a new mask and select background, and it does kind of the same thing where it's just scanning for what is anything but the subject, and I can bring up the background exposure just a touch if I wanted to kind of make this whole scene look a little bit more poppy. I can bring up our shadows within this if I wanted and just kind of make this image overall a little bit more bright. Yes, I could do that with an overall just like exposure adjustment through the global adjustments panel. But I kind of want to have some flexibility of like being able to vary how much I'm affecting the background in relation to the person, and maybe I want the person to pop more than the background. Maybe there's something specific in the background that I do want to hide or maybe bring to light more, right? Sometimes the background can be part of the subject, and it's important that we do what we need to do to highlight that. I'm going to warm this up just a touch more, just to kind of give this a nice glow effect. Because I do really like enjoy a nice like warm photo. Um, Personal preference, and some people really shoot super warm. Some people are more, cool and washed out. Totally fine, whatever you want to do. So let's kind of look where we came from. We started here, lots of red and pink. We can see here. Now we have kind of more even skin tones. We have, more of a tan look, which is great, like a warmer look, which is what I really like. And overall, I'm pretty pleased with how the photo is coming along. Um, as far as uh, the global adjustments, sometimes I like to come in here and kind of play with like what happens. Like if you turn down blacks, for example, it can make a photo look really crunchy, can add some really interesting effects to it. So like bringing, turning the blacks up will make the photo look a little more washed out. Kind of popular if you're doing like, outdoors, maybe wedding photos or something. You just want kind of this dreamy effect or something. You can like really crank the blacks up and kind of give this, you know, very sunny, hazy effect. But sometimes I like to pull this down a little bit and add a little bit more contrast. It's like another way to do that without actually affecting the contrast itself. So I'm kind of liking that. And another interesting uh, setting that I don't think a lot of people use is dehaze. And if you ever look at buildings in the distance and they look hazy, that's just the atmospheric haze that's between you and what you're looking at. Well, the dehaze can allow you to um, make a photo look really interesting and sometimes even like bring back detail into the photo that maybe you lost. So like I right now dehaze set to +5. That's just part of the preset that I use. And so if I kind of reset this really quick, notice the photo got a little bit lighter. If I actually bring dehaze down, it makes it because it's like really interesting, like dreamy glow to it, right? You can go wild with it and make it look like totally unrecognizable, super washed out. Going the other direction, it can make it look really crunchy and very, you know, interesting details, like looking at the brick in the background. I can see individual bricks if I reset this. Oops, wrong one. I can't really see the details of the bricks anymore. So D Hayes does a lot of really interesting things in terms of like bringing out detail. Like we can see more detail in her skin and stuff and in her hair, but that's not always what we want, is it? We want to have a nice kind of balanced representation of kind of what that person looks like. At least for me shooting portraits, that's what I like to go with. And I'll play with this dehaze every once in a while. I can like reset it to 0 by double clicking on the setting. That works for any of these, by the way. And I can hit Control Z to bring it back and kind of figure out like, do I like this, here? Does it make sense to use that setting for this? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes these, sliders aren't really necessary. Maybe you bring up exposure and the shadows, or maybe you want to crunch the shadows. There's all kinds of things you want to do, but again, don't go too crazy. So this here is a photo that I edited um, with kind of a similar process. And as you see, like came out pretty much the same. I do have to do little touch-ups here on the top of her arm because I noticed that um, while I was editing this. So that's really easy to just come in here. I can Control C, and I have all these masks, which actually I should just go ahead and name these masks. So this is background. This helps me out to remember what's what. So this is, we're going to say uh, mid arm, mid forearm. And this one is upper forearm. And this is just the subject, right? Now, Control C. I'm gonna uncheck all the rest of that stuff because I just need mid arm and forearm. Now, because these are brushes, I'm gonna have to move them around in the frame. They're gonna be different sizes because just, you know, these are two different zoomed in photos. Because I already have some masks on here, I'm just gonna hit merge. If I hit replace, it's gonna delete the existing masks, all of them, and then uh, it'll just apply only these two. So now what I gotta do, I gotta come here, I gotta find my mask and see it's like way up here. Come here. So I gotta do is, I gotta drag this guy down here. So I'm gonna pull it. There we go. And you can see if I move this around, what happens to her hand. So we know we got a mask. This is upper forearm, so let's go and move that up here. And again, because we did this whole like the color range, we actually need to reset that because it doesn't, it's sampling like her dress as opposed to like the area that we actually want to affect. So we just want to resample that. And we want to paint this. Get this all good. Okay. And if you accidentally paint an area that you didn't intend to, like just do the overlay, like if I paint up here and, I can see that, whoops, I actually didn't want to paint that area, for example, I can hold. uh, in Windows it's Alt, on Mac it's like I think the Command key. It changes to a subtract. And I can change the size, the radius of this brush, and I can turn on show overlay. I can see where I've painted, and I can just remove this by holding shift and then click and dragging around, and I can unpaint areas that I accidentally brushed over. So, and I don't have to get super like close to this stuff here, because we have the color range implemented, it knows not to look at that area as it's applying it. So let's turn that mask off and let's find the mid arm. Sometimes this gets a little challenging because when you have a brush and it's very small, it can be hard to locate where that brush went. Like clearly I see that I have the point color, which is what we want to do there. And then my brush is sitting underneath of it. Okay, so we'll do is take that guy down here. And again, if you hold spacebar and click and drag while you have your this pane open, then you can click and drag around the photo. Um, that way you can kind of move and pan around. So we're just gonna kind of paint that really quick. All right. And sometimes when you're kind of pasting these settings across photos, you might realize that like you don't need one or some of these masks. Like the color value is just different enough or just matched enough that it's like unnecessary. Um, so just keep that in mind as you're going through. You may just have to, delete some masks and move on with life. Okay, so I've done that. Let's zoom out here, see how this feels. And if I feel like I can obviously see this color show up, then like I know I've overdone it. If I zoom out and it's like, whoa, that looks weird, um, I need to do better on that, then I can just pull this back up. I go to my adjustments and I can start kind of tweaking this a bit. So I can like play around with it to kind of make it blend a bit better. And you can see like I didn't really change, like I didn't like touch any like the hue or temperature or tint. I really just kind of brought up the exposure just a touch to like match the color and the brightness of her skin in order to hide this or to like blend this in. And this again is like just showing that like you don't need Photoshop to do a lot of this stuff. Like if you're really good at Photoshop and you can just like jump in there and start cranking stuff out, then go for it. But Lightroom is way easier and faster to learn than Photoshop by leaps and bounds. And Lightroom Classic is kind of the de facto standard that you probably want to go with, as opposed to trying to, learn the new Lightroom, which, a lot of people don't really use. Honestly, I don't know any photographer that uses the new Lightroom, which is just called, I think, just Lightroom, for various reasons. And Lightroom Classic has just kind of been this powerhouse of a tool that gets updated consistently. So don't let the name fool you. Don't think that just because it's called Classic doesn't mean that it's not getting updates, because it most certainly is. Now, what I'd like to do here, I see this photo. I feel like I want to kind of update some skin tones. I'm gonna do a reference. So it's a Shift R. And I want to see like how does this feel if I kind of zoom into the face and like do a comparison between these two. Am I kind of pretty match? I can tell the photo on the left is much more on the warmer side, just looking at her hair especially. And I might want to reset myself and go, okay, yeah, it probably is a little too warm. It's nice having that comparison um, in order to make sure that I haven't gone too far off. In fact, I can just come over here and just reference like what did I make this photo on the temperature 6800. All right, well let's just copy that, paste it over here. And because these photos are taking the exact same spot, I can just use the same colors. Now, something I could have also done very easily is I edit one photo, I get it where I want, I have a photo that's in the exact same scene, same lighting and everything. All I would have to do is just copy this whole thing, I do my basic adjustments. Everything else, I don't really need to do anything else here because I'm not doing much else beyond, you know, my basic adjustment panel, my masking, you know, I would hit copy and I'm just going to make a virtual copy of this and just show you what happens. I'm going to create a virtual copy and it has all its edits. So I'm going to Control Shift R. And what Control Shift R does is it resets all the parameters. It deletes every single thing out of here. And I can actually go down here to my history and I can see I reset the settings. Control Shift R um, is great for if you're trying to like maybe make a couple different edits, get some ideas on like what direction you want to go, or maybe you have an idea that you want to play around with, some different presets you want to use, kind of give the client some more variability of effects and styles. Creating a copy and then resetting them, applying different effects can be a really good way to go. But in this case, we're going to pretend like I have, these two photos from the same scene. I've edited the first one, I got it where I like it, and I come over and I just Control V, paste onto the next photo in line. And this saves me a lot of time from having to manually adjust all of these dials and go back and forth. So because I have a mask applied, I have a few, it's the background, it's the subject, it's all this other stuff. It takes a minute to get that applied. And I can see kind of right off the bat that, it doesn't have the right colors. And that's mainly because there are issues with some of these masks. Sometimes it doesn't get the subject, so I have to update the subject. And it did. It just fixed a lot of those colors. And we saw there was like an exclamation mark because it was like, whoa, I don't know where the subject is. You're going to have to update this. And that does happen when you're talking about using these AI masks where it's looking for the person. Totally normal. Overall, I can tell that the photo is um, more highly exposed than the photo I came from. And I'm just going to bring that down just a touch. That has to do with metering. So I was more zoomed in. I do more center weighted metering when I'm doing my photography. And so if I'm zoomed out, it has more of an area to meter on, so you get more of the background, possibly more of the subject, and it will expose based on that. If I'm more zoomed in, it's exposing off of more of like the subject that's kind of in the center of the frame. And so I can get like a different exposure, which is normal. That does happen. And I can hold Shift and press R, and I can bring up this again. I can see like how does this look and compare to where it came from. And every once in a while, I might see that, you know what, I kind of like that this photo on the right is a little bit more exposed than the photo on the left. And I can come back here and I can just kind of like tweak this up just a touch, just bring it up, see how it feels, and just give myself a reset. Okay, where did I come from? Where am I going? Does this feel good? You know? And then I'm ready to kind of move on to the next thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that virtual copy. Don't need it. And I'm ready to move on. Now I can kind of come back to this later, like after I've done a bunch of edits, I've kind of reset myself. I can say that I am either, yes, this photo is where I want it, I'm ready to publish it, get it to the client, or you know what, now that I've come back to it after having not looked at it for a minute, I see there's some little things here that I might want to adjust, or maybe something doesn't look right, and I can just modify that to my liking. A key thing that I like to do, as I'm doing these edits is to kind of like zoom out a bit. I want to just come back here and look at these photos and make sure that like what I'm seeing is the effect that I want to get. So like here's an example where like early on I was editing and as I'm kind of going through I'm seeing more of this like effect of like the brick and the blue having this weird effect on the skin tones. And I can come back to that and I can adjust for that, knowing that I've already figured out how to get that right color on here. And I can also see just side by side that like, there are parts of her face look a little bit more blue than I would like them to be. There's a little bit too much of a difference in contrast to that. So I know I can come back here and just do a little balancing on the skin tones on those parts. Really simple stuff. Here, this photo looks nice. Like, this is a very well exposed. The building looks good, but over here the building looks more hazy. And that has to do with the fact that I had sun coming into the lens. And it does cause this like washout effect, which can be very artistic, can be very useful, but it does cause the scene overall to feel washed out. In fact, if I do a side by side and we look at the just the bricks, these bricks look on the right side, they look more washed out. They are not as rich as the color of the bricks here, and that's just the what happens when you shoot into the sun. You lose contrast. So I could come in here and I can turn up dehaze just a touch like that, and we can kind of undo dehaze for a sec. Boom, and apply the dehaze. And I can come back here and I can just do a quick comparison side by side and see, is this, about the right tone of color that I want to see. And it's pretty close, just do a side by side of the couple elements there. I could boost the dehaze more if I wanted to kind of get it closer, but ideally, we don't need to really worry about getting it exact and matching 100% between two because these are slightly different scenes and there are different shooting conditions. And like using too much dehaze can cause the photo to look weird and have unusual effects. Um, so just coming back to the grid view and just kind of getting a feel like, yeah, okay, that looks more like kind of what I'd want it to look. I've only edited a few of these so far, but I think this is a good stopping point just to kind of show you how I'm going through my edits. How am I taking these learning opportunities, to start here, seeing what I'm seeing as I'm kind of getting further in and realizing I have to apply some different changes to the previous photos, and I already have the tools and the things I need to do as I'm going through. So as you edit your photos, you're going to learn different adjustments you're going to have to make. And you'll have to go back and apply that to some of your previous photos. And you get better at identifying this stuff as you're kind of going through and making these edits. I guess last thing is when you're doing your edits, make sure that if you're used to having like a night mode or night shift or whatever on turned on your computer that makes your display look more of like an orange hue, to turn it off. And the reason you want to do that is because if you're editing your photos with that enabled, and a screen is just naturally more orange than it would normally be, what you're going to end up with is you coming in here and turning the temperature down quite a lot on your photos. And then when your client sees them, they're going to get a different experience than what you're going to see on your computer from where you're editing from, which brings up a really good point that when you do get your photos ready and you're ready to distribute them to the client, look at them on your phone, look at them on some other computer maybe, and just make sure that they look correct. Sometimes things happen. Maybe we miss something during exporting and you know, we don't catch it until we're like looking at it on another device. So, really important to do that before you deliver your photos. And I think you'll catch a lot of the things and keep yourself um, putting out high quality work and keeping that experience consistent that people know to love and appreciate about your work, and you'll do great. All right, y'all. Well, that's it for today, and I appreciate y'all sticking in there and rocking through this with me, and I hope you learned a lot. Have yourself a fantastic day.